Coach Bradley's scissors gleamed under the fluorescent lights as he held Jasmine Porter's severed braid like a trophy. "Next time, you'll learn to follow the dress code," he sneered, while his phone streamed her humiliation to the entire varsity team's group chat. What he didn't know was that the tiny camera woven into her headband was recording everything, and in exactly 47 minutes, his 20-year reign of terror at Westfield Academy would come crashing down. Before we dive into Jasmine's story, I want to take a quick moment to thank each of you watching Agers Matey on /isgrand.com. These stories of courage and resilience exist because of your incredible support. If this video touches your heart or reminds you of your own strength, please hit that like button. It helps more people discover these important messages. And if you've ever faced bullying or stood up for someone who has, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Your experiences matter, and sharing them creates a community where nobody feels alone. The morning had started like any other at Westfield Academy, an elite private school nestled in the affluent suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina. At 7:15 a.m., Jasmine Porter stepped through the gleaming glass doors, her stomach churning with the familiar anxiety that had plagued her since transferring 3 weeks ago. She was one of only 12 black students in a school of 800, a diversity statistic the administration loved to tout in their glossy brochures, while doing nothing to address the daily microaggressions that made her feel like an intruder in their pristine halls. Jasmine's mother, Dr. Evelyn Porter, had accepted a position as chief of neurosurgery at Charlotte Medical Center, a career milestone that came with a 7-figure salary and the ability to finally give her daughter every opportunity. But opportunities, Jasmine was learning, came wrapped in thorns at places like Westfield. The scholarship students whispered about her designer backpack, while the wealthy kids mocked her natural hair, creating a no man's land where she belonged nowhere. The real problem at Westfield wasn't the students, though it was Coach Marcus Bradley. Standing at 6'4" with the build of the college linebacker he'd once been, Bradley ruled the school's athletic department with an iron fist. His teams won state championships. His players got full rides to Division I schools. And the board of trustees treated him like royalty. He had a corner office larger than most classrooms, a $700,000 annual salary, and most dangerously, the implicit permission to run his programs however he saw fit. Bradley had taken an instant dislike to Jasmine the moment she'd walked into his mandatory physical wellness class, a required course. He'd somehow convinced the administration to let him teach despite having no actual teaching credentials beyond his coaching certifications. Maybe it was her confidence, the way she didn't shrink when he barked orders. Maybe it was her mother's position, which placed her above him in the social hierarchy he desperately tried to control. Or maybe, as Jasmine suspected, it was simply the color of her skin, combined with her refusal to play the role of the grateful scholarship kid. "Porter!" His voice boomed across the gymnasium during that morning's class. "What did I tell you about hair regulations?" Jasmine's hand instinctively went to her braids, which she'd carefully styled with small gold cuffs at the ends, a gift from her grandmother. The student handbook says hair accessories are permitted as long as they don't pose a safety hazard. Coach Bradley, his face reddened, a vein pulsing at his temple. "I don't care what the handbook says. In my class, I make the rules. Those decorations are a distraction and a safety hazard. Remove them immediately." "They're not decorations," Jasmine said quietly but firmly. "They're cultural accessories, and they're explicitly protected under the school's diversity and inclusion policy that was updated last year." The gym fell silent. 27 students held their breath as Coach Bradley's jaw clenched. Nobody challenged him. Nobody, especially not a transfer student who'd been there less than a month. "Office now," he growled. But Jasmine wasn't the naive girl he took her for. For the past week, she'd been documenting every interaction after hearing whispers from other students about Bradley's special attention to anyone who didn't fit his narrow definition of appropriate. The tiny camera in her headband, a gift from her tech-savvy older brother who dealt with his own share of workplace harassment, had been recording since she'd entered the building. As she followed Bradley through the halls, she noticed how other students pressed themselves against lockers to avoid his path. She saw the fear in their eyes, the way they averted their gazes. How many of them had stories they were too afraid to tell? Bradley's office was a shrine to his ego. Trophies lined every surface. Photos of him with professional athletes covered the walls, and a massive oak desk dominated the space. He slammed the door behind them, the sound echoing through the empty corridor. "Sit," he commanded, but Jasmine remained standing. "I prefer to stand." "Thank you." His face darkened further. "You think you're special, don't you? Think because your mommy's some big-shot doctor that the rules don't apply to you? I think the rules apply to everyone equally," Jasmine replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Including the ones about discrimination and harassment." Bradley laughed. A harsh sound, devoid of humor. "Harassment? Little girl, you haven't seen anything yet. You want to play games? Let's play." He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a pair of scissors, large, industrial ones typically used for cutting athletic tape. "Since you can't follow simple safety regulations, I'll help you comply." Jasmine stepped back. "You can't do that. It's assault. It's enforcement of safety protocols," he said, advancing around the desk. "And who's going to believe you over me? I've been here 20 years. You've been here 20 days. That's when Jasmine made a calculated decision. She turned to run, knowing he would grab Herond, knowing her camera would capture everything. His meaty hand caught her shoulder, spinning her around with enough force to slam her against the wall. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs, but she kept her head up, ensuring the camera's angle remained optimal. "Hold still," he snarled, grabbing one of her braids. "No, stop! This is assault!" Jasmine shouted, loud enough for anyone in the vicinity to hear. But the halls were empty. Bradley had chosen his timing well. First period had started, and the administrative offices were on the other side of the building. The scissors flashed, and she felt the sickening sensation of her braid being severed. 18 inches of carefully maintained hair, representing years of growth and care, fell to the floor. Bradley held it up like a trophy, a satisfied smirk on his face. "There! Now you're in compliance. Want to keep testing me?" Jasmine's eyes filled with tear snot from fear, but from rage. "You just committed assault and battery on a minor? On camera?" Bradley's smirk faltered for just a moment before returning full force. "What camera? I don't see any camera. And even if there was one, you think anybody's going to care about some little troublemaker getting a haircut? Now get out of my office before I decide you need more compliance assistance." Jasmine gathered her severed braid from the floor, her hands shaking not with fear but with the effort of restraining herself from saying what she really thought. She had what she needed. But as she turned to leave, Bradley made one more fatal error. He pulled out his phone and started recording. "Look what happens to students who don't follow Coach Bradley's rules," he narrated, focusing on her damaged hair. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before challenging authority. Won't you, Porter?" Jasmine paused at the door. "Are you live streaming that?" "Team captain's group chat," he said proudly. "Gotta make sure everyone understands the importance of following regulations." "Don't worry. It's a private group. Only about 40 students, plus whoever they share it with." Of course, the casual cruelty of it, the way he weaponized humiliation as a teaching tool made Jasmine's stomach turn, but it also gave her exactly what she needed. Evidence of his intent to cause emotional distress, shared with witnesses. She left his office and walked straight to the nearest bathroom, locking herself in a stall. With shaking fingers, she pulled out her phone and started uploading the video from her camera to 3 separate cloud services. Then she texted her brother, "Code red. It happened. Evidence secured." His response was immediate. "On it. Stay strong. J. Cavalry's coming." The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Students stared at her lopsided hair, some with sympathy, others with the cruel amusement of those who were just glad it wasn't them. But Jasmine held her head high, attending each class as if nothing had happened, all while her brother worked his magic from his MIT dorm room. At 11:45 a.m., during lunch period, everything changed. Jasmine was sitting alone in the cafeteria, picking at a salad she had no appetite for, when she heard the first gasp, then another, within seconds. The entire cafeteria was buzzing with the sound of notification alerts. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "Did you see what Coach Bradley did?" The video edited to protect Jasmine's identity while clearly showing Bradley's face, and actions had been simultaneously posted to every major social media platform with the hashtag number Westfield Assault. Her brother had blurred her face, but left the audio crystal clear, including Bradley's threats and his admission that he was live streaming her humiliation. But that wasn't the masterstroke. At exactly noon, as the cafeteria was reaching peak capacity, the school's PA system crackled to life. Instead of the usual noon announcements, Bradley's voice boomed through every speaker in the building. "Little girl, you haven't seen anything yet. You want to play games? Let's play." The sound of scissors cutting through hair was amplified throughout the school, followed by Jasmine's cries of, "This is assault," and Bradley's mocking laughter. The cafeteria erupted. Students who had suffered in silence for years began sharing their own stories. The quiet girl from the volleyball team revealed how Bradley had cut her hijab during practice, claiming it was a safety hazard. A sophomore boy described being forced to do hundreds of push-ups in front of the team for having girly highlights in his hair. Story after story poured out, a dam of silence finally breaking. But the administration's response was swift and predictable. Principal Morrison's voice replaced the recorded audio. "Students, please remain calm. There has been a security breach of our PA system. Return to your scheduled classes immediately. Any student found sharing or discussing unauthorized media will face disciplinary action." Jasmine felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to find 3 girls from her PE class standing behind her. "We saw what he did," one of them said quietly. "We've been recording his classes for weeks, hoping someone would finally stand up to him. We have evidence too." Within minutes, Jasmine found herself surrounded by supporters. Students she'd never spoken to were offering their own documentation photos of bruises from accidental contact during his aggressive coaching, screenshots of inappropriate messages, recordings of verbal abuse that had been normalized for so long that victims had stopped recognizing it as wrong. The school's Wi-Fi mysteriously went down at 12:15 p.m., but it was too late. The video had already escaped into the wild, and students with cellular data continued sharing it. Parents began calling the school demanding answers. Local news vans started arriving in the parking lot. At 12:30 p.m., Coach Bradley made his move. He stormed into the cafeteria with 2 security guards, his face purple with rage. "Porter," he bellowed, "you're coming with me. Now." The cafeteria fell silent. Every phone came out, recording. Jasmine stood slowly, her mother's poise evident in every movement. On what grounds? Cyberbullying, harassment, and violation of school technology policies. He snarled, "You're suspended pending expulsion. Security, escort her out." But before the security guards could move, a voice rang out from the cafeteria entrance. "I don't think so, Doctor." Evelyn Porter strode into the cafeteria like an avenging angel in a Chanel suit. Behind her walked 2 people in dark suits who screamed, "Lawyers!" and a woman holding a Charlotte PD detective's badge. "Nobody touches my daughter," Dr. Porter said, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to giving life and death orders. "Detective Morrison, I believe you have some questions for Coach Bradley about the video evidence of assault I provided to your department 30 minutes ago." Bradley's face went from purple to white. "This is ridiculous. I was enforcing school safety policies." "By cutting a student's hair without consent while live streaming it to minors," the detective interrupted. "That's assault, battery, and potentially distribution of harmful material to minors." Marcus Bradley, you're under arrest. The cafeteria exploded in cheers as Bradley was handcuffed, but Jasmine noticed something else. Principal Morrison trying to slip out the side door. One of the lawyers intercepted him. Going somewhere? Principal Morrison? We have some questions about your failure to respond to 17 formal complaints about Coach Bradley over the past 3 years. Documents that were mysteriously lost until a whistleblower in your office provided copies to the school board this morning. As Bradley was led away, he turned back to Jasmine with pure hatred in his eyes. You think you've won? You have no idea who you're messing with? My lawyers will bury you. This school needs me. These championships, this legacy, your legacy. Jasmine interrupted, finding her voice at last, is assault, intimidation, and abuse of power, and it ends today. The detective guided Bradley out as he continued ranting about lawsuits and connections, but Jasmine wasn't done. She climbed onto a cafeteria table, her severed hair, a visible reminder of what had transpired. I know I'm new here, she began, her voice carrying across the silent room. I know some of you think I don't belong, but what happened to me today has been happening to students here for years. How many of you have been told your hair is wrong, your clothes, your body, your identity? How many of you have been afraid to speak up because he was Coach Bradley, because he had power, because nobody would believe you? Hands slowly raised throughout the cafeteria. First a few, then dozens, then what looked like half the student body. We don't have to be silent anymore, Jasmine continued. We have voices, we have each other, and we have the truth. A slow clap started from the back of the room. It was joined by another, then another, until the entire cafeteria was giving her a standing ovation. Even some teachers, freed from the oppressive hierarchy that had protected Bradley, were applauding. But in the administrative offices, an emergency board meeting was being called. The president of the board, Harold Wellington, whose son was the star quarterback Bradley, had personally mentored, was reviewing damage control strategies with the school's legal team. This is a disaster, Wellington muttered, scrolling through his phone as the video hit 6-figure view counts. 20 years of championship tradition destroyed by one troublemaker with a camera. We need to contain this immediately. Sir? One of the lawyers ventured. The evidence is fairly damning. Multiple students are coming forward, and there's apparently years of documentation. I don't care about the evidence, Wellington snapped. Bradley has made this school what it is. Do you know how much our athletic program brings in? How many of our graduates go on to elite colleges because of his recommendations? We can't let one incident. One incident? The lawyer pulled up his tablet. Sir? I'm looking at 43 separate complaint files that were submitted and subsequently buried. There are screenshots of inappropriate messages to female athletes. There's video evidence of him using racial slurs during practice. This isn't one incident, it's a pattern of behavior that the school systematically covered up. Wellington's phone rang. He looked at the caller ID and paled. It's Channel 9 News. They want a statement. As he stepped out to avoid the call, his assistant rushed in. Sir? There's more. Someone leaked the athletic department's financial records. Coach Bradley has been embezzling funds, almost $200,000 in improper expenses over the past 5 years. Vacations charged as recruiting trips, personal purchases as equipment costs. The other board members exchanged glances. Supporting a successful coach was one thing. Supporting a criminal was another. Back in the cafeteria, Dr. Porter had pulled Jasmine aside. Are you okay, baby? Let me see what he did. Jasmine turned, showing the jagged edge where her braid had been cut. Her mother's professional composure cracked for just a moment, tears forming in her eyes. I'm going to destroy him, she whispered fiercely. That man will never work with children again. Mom, it's bigger than just him, Jasmine said. The whole system protected him. Principal Morrison, the board, other coaches who looked the other way. They're all complicit. Dr. Porter nodded. Then we destroy the system and rebuild it better. Your brother's already compiled a database of every social media post, every piece of evidence students have shared. We have a meeting with the ACLU tomorrow, and 3 major law firms have offered to take the case pro bono. As they talked, students continued approaching Jasmine with their own stories. A pattern emerged. Bradley hadn't just targeted students of color. Though they bore the brunt of his abuse, he went after anyone who didn't fit his narrow definition of acceptable LGBTQ students, kids with disabilities, those from less affluent families, anyone who challenged his authority. His 20-year reign had created a culture of fear that infected the entire school. At 1:45 p.m., an emergency assembly was called. Students filed into the auditorium to find not Principal Morrison, but the assistant principal, Miss Chen, at the podium. Morrison, they would later learn, had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Students, Miss Chen began, her voice shaking slightly. Today has been a difficult day for our community. We've learned that one of our staff members has been arrested for assault, and we're investigating serious allegations of systemic failures in how we've protected our students. A voice from the crowd shouted, "You knew. You all knew and did nothing." Miss Chen nodded sadly. "You're right. We failed you. I failed you. I saw the signs and chose to believe that winning championships was more important than your safety and dignity. That changes today." She outlined immediate steps: an independent investigation, a review of all athletic department policies, mandatory training for all staff on recognizing and reporting abuse, and most importantly, a student-led task force to recommend systematic changes. We're also announcing the immediate suspension of all athletic programs pending review. The auditorium erupted in protests, not from supporters of Bradley, but from student athletes. "That's not fair." A soccer player stood up. "We didn't do anything wrong. Why should we be punished for what he did?" Jasmine surprised herself by standing up. She's right. The student athletes are victims too. They need their programs, their scholarships. Punish the system, not the students. Miss Chen looked relieved. "You're right. Athletics will continue under interim leadership while we search for coaches who understand that building character is more important than winning trophies." As the assembly concluded, Jasmine felt the weight of the day settling on her shoulders. She'd won this battle, but she could feel the war brewing. In the parking lot, news fans multiplied. On social media, number Westfield assault competed with number defend Bradley. As his supporters rallied, threatening messages began appearing in her DMs, ATMs, calling her everything from a troublemaker to words she wouldn't repeat. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You think you're safe because he's in jail? This isn't over. You just declared war on Westfield tradition. We know where you live." The threatening message glowed on Jasmine's phone screen as she sat in her mother's Mercedes in the Westfield Academy parking lot. Her hands trembled. Not from fear, but from exhaustion. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. "Let me see," Dr. Porter said, taking the phone. Her expression hardened as she read, "We're going straight to the police station to add this to the report. And tonight, you're staying at the Ritz-Carlton with me. I already booked a suite." "Mom, we can't run. We're not running. We're being strategic. Your brother's flying in from Boston tonight, and we need a secure location to coordinate with the legal team." She started the car, her jaw set with determination. They want a war? They have no idea who they're dealing with. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Jasmine noticed several cars following them. Not paparazzi, the vehicles were too expensive, too coordinated. Parents of Bradley's star athletes. She realized the quarterback's BMW, the point guard's Range Rover. They wanted her to know she was being watched. At the police station, Detective Morrison, no relation to the principal, took the threat seriously. "This changes things," she said, studying the message. "Combined with the video evidence of assault and his attempt to publicly humiliate you, we can add intimidation and conspiracy charges. Do you recognize the number?" Jasmine shook her head, but the detective was already typing, traced to a burner phone, but purchased with a credit card belonging to... She paused, eyebrows rising. Harold Wellington III. That would be the board president's son, Dr. Porter finished. The star quarterback. The detective smiled grimly. Apparently, young mister, Wellington isn't as smart as he thinks. Making terroristic threats is a felony, especially when it involves witness intimidation. By 5 p.m., the story had exploded beyond Charlotte. Westfield assault was trending nationally, and major news outlets were picking up the story. CNN's headline read, "Private school coach arrested for assault after cutting student's hair on live stream," but it was the subtitle that caught Jasmine's attention. Decades of abuse allegations surface as students break their silence. Her phone buzzed constantly with interview requests, but also with messages of support from students across the country sharing their own stories of coach abuse, teacher harassment, and administrative cover-ups. She wasn't alone. She had never been alone. At the Ritz-Carlton, Jasmine's brother Marcus arrived with his laptop and a grim expression. At 22, he was already making waves in tech circles for his work in digital rights advocacy. "Jay, you need to see this," he said, pulling up a complex web of financial documents. "I did some digging into Westfield's records, public information they thought was buried in bureaucracy. The web he'd uncovered was staggering. Coach Bradley wasn't just embezzling, was at the center of a complex scheme involving recruiting violations, grade manipulation for athletes, and what appeared to be a pay-for-play system where wealthy parents could buy their children spots on varsity teams. Look at this." Marcus pointed to a spreadsheet. Harold Wellington donated $50,000 to the athletic department last year. Coincidentally, his son went from JV benchwarmer to starting quarterback. Similar patterns for at least a dozen other families. Dr. Porter studied the screen. "This is RICO territory, racketeering, conspiracy, fraud." Bradley wasn't acting alone. This goes all the way to the board. A knock at the door interrupted them. Jasmine looked through the peephole to see a young woman, maybe 25, with tired eyes and a determined expression. "My name is Melissa Crawford," she said through the door. "I was a student at Westfield 7 years ago. I need to talk to you about Coach Bradley." After verifying her identity, they let her in. Melissa's story was worse than anything they'd imagined. Bradley hadn't just cut her hair, he'd systematically destroyed her swimming career after she refused his private training sessions. The implications were horrifying. "I wasn't the only one," Melissa said, tears streaming down her face. "There were at least 6 girls on the swim team. We tried to report it, but Principal Morrison said we were misinterpreting intense coaching methods. My parents pulled me out of school, but the damage was done. I haven't been in a pool since." Dr. Porter immediately called their legal team. "We need to expand the investigation. This isn't just assault, we're looking at potential sexual harassment and abuse of minors." As they worked through the night, more stories emerged. Former students created a private Facebook group that grew to over 300 members within hours, each sharing their experiences. The patterns were undeniable. Bradley targeted vulnerable students, particularly those who couldn't afford to leave Westfield or whose parents wouldn't believe them over a celebrated coach. At 2 a.m., Jasmine finally collapsed into bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Her phone, supposedly on silent, lit up with a FaceTime request from an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. Harold Wellington III's face filled the screen, his privileged features twisted with rage. Behind him, she could see at least a dozen other students, the core of Westfield's athletic elite. "You proud of yourself?" he snarled. "You just destroyed a legend? Coach Bradley made me the player I am. Now my Michigan scholarship is in jeopardy because you couldn't follow simple rules. He assaulted me." Jasmine said simply, "He cut your hair. Big deal. He's broken my nose twice during practice, and I thanked him for making me tougher. That's what real athletes do. We sacrifice. We don't run crying to mommy and the media." One of the girls behind him leaned forward. Do you have any idea how many colleges are calling to withdraw interest? You didn't just hurt Coach, you're destroying our futures. Jasmine felt a familiar fire building in her chest. Your futures? What about Melissa Crawford's future? What about every student he terrorized who quit sports entirely? What about the kids who transferred schools, who developed anxiety disorders, who still flinch when they hear a whistle blow? Your scholarships were built on their suffering. Drama queen. Harold spat. This is what's wrong with your kind. Always playing the victim. Always. Marcus appeared behind Jasmine and smiled coldly at the camera. Harold, my man, you realize you're on a recorded line, right? And that you just added racial discrimination to your growing list of charges? Also, fun fact, I'm screen recording this entire conversation. Please, continue telling us how you really feel. Harold's face went white. The call ended abruptly. Idiots, Marcus muttered. Entitled? Privileged idiots who think daddy's money makes them untouchable. He turned to Jasmine. You okay? She nodded. Though tears threatened, it's just, how did it get this bad? How did nobody stop it for 20 years? Because nobody had your courage, he said simply. Until today. The next morning brought a tsunami of developments. Harold Wellington III was arrested at 6 a.m. for making terroristic threats and witness intimidation. The school board announced an emergency meeting for noon. 3 more coaches were placed on administrative leave as allegations surfaced about their knowledge of Bradley's behavior. But the most shocking revelation came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Ellis, Westfield's 60-year-old librarian, arrived at the police station with boxes of documents. I've been keeping copies of every complaint, every incident report, every email about Coach Bradley for 15 years. She announced, they told me to destroy them, but I couldn't. I knew someday someone would be brave enough to stand up. The documents were damning, not just complaints about Bradley, but a systematic cover-up involving forged psychological evaluations, falsified background checks, and even payoffs to former students to sign NDAs. The corruption went deeper than anyone imagined. At the emergency board meeting, the Westfield auditorium was packed beyond capacity. Parents, students, media, and community members filled every seat and lined the walls. Jasmine sat in the front row between her mother and Marcus, trying to ignore the hostile stares from Bradley's supporters and the sympathetic looks from his victims. Board President Harold Wellington took the podium, his usual commanding presence diminished. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to address the serious allegations. They're not allegations, a voice shouted from the crowd. A woman stood up, shaking. I'm Jennifer Patterson. My daughter was on Bradley's track team 5 years ago. She tried to kill herself after months of his abuse. You knew. I sent letters, emails, made phone calls. You all knew and you did nothing. The room erupted. Parent after parent stood to share their stories. The board members shifted uncomfortably, their prepared statements suddenly woefully inadequate. Wellington tried to regain control. Please, if we could just maintain order. Where was order when our children were being abused? Another parent demanded. Where was order when you were cashing checks from boosters while Bradley terrorized students? Dr. Porter stood, commanding attention with her presence. Mr. Wellington, the time for prepared statements is over. This community demands action, real action, starting with the immediate resignation of every board member who was aware of complaints against Bradley and failed to act. That's ridiculous. Wellington blustered. We can't just... Actually, you can. A new voice spoke from the side entrance. Everyone turned to see District Attorney Rebecca Thornton enter, flanked by FBI agents. Harold Wellington, you're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and embezzlement of federal education funds. You have the right to remain silent. As Wellington was led away in handcuffs, DA Thornton addressed the stunned crowd. The FBI has been investigating financial irregularities at Westfield Academy for 6 months. The assault on Miss Porter and the subsequent revelations have accelerated our timeline. This is now a federal investigation into systematic corruption, fraud, and civil rights violations. The remaining board members looked at each other in panic, one by one. 3 of them announced their immediate resignation. Only 2 remained, both newer members who had apparently been kept in the dark about the worst of the corruption. Miss Chen, the assistant principal, was asked to speak. "I've been at Westfield for 3 years," she began, voice shaking. "I was hired from a public school where reporting abuse was mandatory and taken seriously. When I tried to implement the same standards here, I was told that Westfield handles things internally. I was a coward. I chose my job over your children's safety. I'm submitting my resignation effective immediately. But first, I'm turning over every document, every email, every piece of evidence I've collected to the authorities." The crowd didn't know whether to applaud or condemn her. The truth was complicated. She had failed them. But she was also trying to make it right. As the meeting devolved into chaos, Jasmine felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Coach Bradley's wife, Patricia, standing behind her with tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," Patricia whispered. "I knew. God help me. I knew something was wrong." The late-night calls from crying students, the way he'd come home raging about soft kids these days. "I should have done something." Jasmine didn't know what to say. The woman's pain was genuine, but so was her complicity. How many people had chosen comfortable silence over difficult truth? That evening, the story dominated national news. Anderson Cooper dedicated an entire hour to the Westfield scandal, interviewing former students, experts on institutional abuse, and Dr. Porter, who had become an unofficial spokesperson for the victims. "This isn't just about one school," Dr. Porter told Cooper. "This is about a culture that prioritizes winning over well-being, that protects predators because they produce championships." How many Coach Bradleys are out there right now, enabled by systems that care more about reputation than children? The interview was interrupted by breaking news. Coach Bradley had been denied bail after prosecutors presented evidence that he had contacted multiple witnesses despite a restraining order. Additionally, a search of his home had uncovered what investigators called disturbing materials related to students' photos taken without consent, detailed notes about their bodies and vulnerabilities, and plans for breaking certain resistant athletes. Jasmine couldn't watch anymore. She retreated to her hotel room, where she found Marcus creating a website, Westfield Survivors, Breaking the Silence. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Creating a platform for healing," he replied. "Look, criminal justice is important, but these people need more. They need community, resources, therapy referrals. Did you know 15 former students have attempted suicide in the past decade? All of them had interactions with Bradley." The statistics were staggering. As more data emerged, the true cost of Westfield's culture became clear. Hundreds of traumatized students, dozens of destroyed athletic careers, immeasurable psychological damage, all for a trophy case and a winning record. Over the next week, Westfield Academy imploded. The interim board, composed of community volunteers and child advocacy experts, made sweeping changes. Every member of the athletic department was placed under review. Mandatory reporting training was instituted for all staff. A team of counselors was brought in to help students process the trauma. But change wasn't easy. Die-hard Bradley supporters organized protests, claiming the coach was being railroaded by the woke mob. They printed Free Bradley t-shirts and held rallies outside the courthouse. Counter-protesters, many of them Bradley's victims, stood silently holding signs with their stories. "He called me worthless every day for 4 years. I still have nightmares about his office. My eating disorder started with his weight checks." The legal proceedings moved quickly. Facing overwhelming evidence and the prospect of life in prison, Bradley agreed to a plea deal: 25 years for multiple counts of assault, battery, harassment, and endangerment of minors. At his sentencing, he was allowed to make a statement. I only ever wanted to build champions, he said, showing no remorse. These kids today are soft. They need discipline, structure. Everything I did was for their own good. Judge Patricia Henley's response was scathing. Mr. Bradley, you didn't build champions. You built victims. You took children entrusted to your care and systematically destroyed their confidence, their safety, and in some cases, their will to live. You are not a coach. You are a predator who used athletics as a weapon. The only soft thing in this courtroom is your character. When the sentence was read, the courtroom erupted in applause. Survivors hugged each other, finally feeling validated after years of silence. Principal Morrison received 10 years for conspiracy and failure to report child abuse. Harold Wellington and 3 other board members faced federal charges that would likely result in significant prison time. The culture of corruption that had protected Bradley was finally being dismantled, but for Jasmine, the victory felt hollow. She had won, but at what cost? Her family had received death threats. She'd had to switch to online schooling for her safety. The Porters were considering moving to another state entirely. Then, something unexpected happened. Westfield's new board invited her to speak at the school's rededication ceremony. The entire athletic complex was being renamed the Melissa Crawford Center for Ethical Athletics after the swimmer whose career Bradley had destroyed. New coaches had been hired, all of them trained in positive coaching methods and trauma-informed practices. Standing at the podium where Bradley had once held court, Jasmine looked out at a transformed audience. Where once there had been fear, she saw hope. Where once there had been silence, she heard voices. 8 weeks ago, I walked into this school hoping to blend in, she began. I left it having started a revolution I never intended to lead. But this isn't my revolution, it's ours. Every student who ever felt powerless, every athlete who was told that abuse was the price of excellence, every person who chose silence because speaking up seemed impossible, this is your victory. She held up her phone, showing a photo of her severed braid. Coach Bradley thought he was taking my power when he cut my hair, but he actually gave me something more valuable, proof that bullies only have the power we allow them to have. And we don't have to allow it anymore. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. As Jasmine left the stage, she was surrounded by students not for autographs or selfies, but for hugs, one by one. They whispered their thanks, their stories, their promises to never stay silent again. 6 months later, Jasmine sat in her new school's library in Atlanta, video chatting with the Westfield Survivors Support Group. The website Marcus had created now hosted thousands of members from schools across the country. Their story had sparked a national conversation about coach abuse and institutional complicity. Any updates from the civil trial? Someone asked. Marcus, who had become the group's unofficial legal liaison, grinned. Westfield's insurance company just agreed to a $35 million settlement. Every verified victim will receive compensation for therapy and educational disruption. But more importantly, they're funding a national hotline for student athletes to report abuse. The call erupted in celebration. It wasn't just about money, it was about acknowledgement, validation, and resources for healing. Dr. Porter appeared behind Jasmine. I'm proud of you. Baby, you know that, right? You changed the world. I didn't mean to. Jasmine admitted, I just wanted him to stop. The best revolutionaries rarely mean to be. Her mother said, they just refuse to accept injustice. And that refusal spreads like wildfire. As the call ended, Jasmine touched her hair, now styled in a powerful afro that she wore like a crown. The braid Bradley had cut had been donated to a museum exhibition on student activism. What he'd meant as humiliation had become a symbol of resistance. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. For a moment, her heart raced, but then she read it. My name is Samantha. I'm 14 and my coach has been hurting me and my teammates. I saw your story. I'm scared, but I recorded him like you did. What do I do now? Jasmine smiled sadly and began typing, First, You tell a trusted adult, then you remember that you're not alone. I'm here, and there are thousands of us ready to support you. Your courage is about to change everything. As she helped another survivor find their voice, Jasmine realized this was her new purpose. She'd been forced into the spotlight, but she would use that light to illuminate the darkness where predators hid, one survivor at a time, one school at a time, one brave voice at a time. They would remake the world into one where children could learn and grow without fear. The revolution had only just begun. Through her window, she could see storm clouds gathering. But for the first time in months, Jasmine wasn't afraid. She had weathered the worst storm of her life and emerged not just intact, but transformed. And now she would be the shelter for others facing their own storms. Coach Bradley had thought he was cutting her down to size. Instead, he had helped her discover she was limitless. The scared girl who had walked into Westfield Academy was gone. In her place stood a warrior, a survivor, a beacon of hope for every silenced voice waiting to roar. And roar they would. 6 months later, President Harris signed Jasmine's law in a Rose Garden ceremony. Jasmine stood with 50 other survivors as the historic legislation became reality. Coach Bradley watched from his prison cell, where reports said he finally showed emotion, not remorse, but rage that his legacy had led to the strongest athlete protection law in the world. But for Jasmine, now 18, and heading to Harvard on a full scholarship to study law and public policy, the greatest victory came in small moments. The emails from coaches thanking her for helping them understand positive coaching. The messages from young athletes saying they felt safe to report problems, the photos of purple ribbons at high school games nationwide. Her Harvard admissions essay had been simple. I learned that sometimes the most important battles are fought not on playing fields, but in principals' offices, courtrooms, and the halls of Congress. I learned that one voice can become a chorus, and a chorus can change the world. I learned that true strength isn't measured in championships, but in the courage to say no more. As she prepared for college, Jasmine kept the museum piece containing her severed braid in her dorm room not as a reminder of trauma, but as proof of transformation. Coach Bradley had tried to cut her down. Instead, he'd helped her grow into something he never could have imagined, a force for justice that would outlive any trophy, any record, any championship banner. The girl who'd walked into Westfield Academy hoping to be invisible had become impossible to ignore, and she was just getting started.